All right, next we're going to talk a little bit about bank sales. We're going to talk a little bit about basically how banks foreclose on properties, or how you can find properties at bank auctions.
Yeah, exactly. So, when we're talking about bank sales, there's a few different ways we can do this. We can do this through auctions. We can do it through REO properties. But right now is really a great time to get started investing in mortgage foreclosures, or what we call bank sales. In fact, kind of looking at the increases, there was a 13% year increase in the foreclosure activity in 2025. But as far as right now, there's between 35 to 40,000 foreclosures happening each month.
Yeah, in fact, and the discount that you can generally get on foreclosures is between 10 to 40%. And if we're looking at it specifically, people make about 67% was the average purchase price, per property in the foreclosure. So that's kind of where they give you that 10 to 40% range. Some properties can sell for less, some properties sell for a little bit more, but that's about where it averages out. And the advantage of that is we get to buy the properties and still have marketable title, which we don't get with tax sale properties. So there are a ton of benefits, and the profit margins are still really good.
Yeah, well, and some of those are selling for 50 cents on the dollar, and then you have some where the competition is fierce and they're selling for closer to 80 to 90 cents on the dollar. But like Shade said, it kind of averages out. But there's a few different ways that we can buy these. First, we can buy them through an online auction. This is where, we're going to things like Real Auction or auction.com or some of these other auction websites where the attorneys that are going through the foreclosure process or offering these properties up through some type of online auction. But in addition to that, we can also buy these as REO properties. And so essentially these are properties that were auctioned at the auction, offered at the auction, and then didn't sell, but then can be purchased directly by the bank or through a realtor they're working with.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's kind of like an over-the-counter property, that went through the auction at some point, like with tax sales. It's kind of what it is here with an REO, simply one that's been through the auction. But there's also a couple other types of sales here on courthouse steps. There's trustee sales at courthouses all over, and we see those a lot of times as well. When we're dealing with tax sales. In fact, there's a lot of areas that still do their sales on courthouses for their tax sales and for their bank foreclosures as well. You'll see that. But the other one types are other government auctions, and these are auctions that are actually operated by the government or by some of these large entities that did a lot of lending and that have a large number of inventory.
Yeah, Fannie Mae, VA, HUD, those type of properties. And as far as being able to buy them, some of them will go to auction. Some you'll be able to buy them from them direct. With bank and REO auctions, REO properties, these are essentially direct buy, where you're purchasing them directly from the bank or through their realtor. And even with REO properties, they're selling for about the same amount as the foreclosure properties, for about 67 cents on the dollar. And so maybe these didn't sell at the auction because the bank owed too much, but they're willing to discount the property to get it out from underneath them. And then with the online auctions and the courthouse auctions, these are essentially the first time they're going to sell, kind of like Shay talked about, where the others could be something more a little bit like an over the counter.
If we're dealing with bank foreclosures, though, a lot of our due diligence steps are going to be the same. The one thing that's different with it is because we're going in before and without any kind of true foreclosure taking place or wiping out or extinguishing any other kinds of liens or encumbrances, we need to do better with our title search, or basically we need to either have a title search performed, or we need to know how to find anything that's attached to the property in terms of any kind of liens or encumbrance. So things like a mortgage, we can discover and find through the records today. And essentially, that's how you're going to be able to find things that are up against a property. In some cases, though, if these properties are involved in a foreclosure, a title search has already been performed and oftentimes will be available to you as well through there. And so that's something we try to use whenever we can find those, whenever we see and have access to the title searches that they performed. But beyond that, the property assessment is much like we're going to do with the tax sale property, where we have to determine what the condition is like right now, and not necessarily, based on what we can see with the online information.
Yeah, well, like Shade said, if we're bidding on these properties at the auction, chances are we're not going to be able to get interior photos. Occasionally that can happen with REO properties, that can happen, but we really kind of got to judge the outside condition and do as much research as we can. Like Shade said, things are still going to stick to this property. It's not like a judicial tax sale property where it's going to eliminate other mortgages. If there's any other mortgages we need to check, then we need to really compare and find out what the market value is of this property. That's going to make a big decision on how much we're willing to bid on the property based on that market value. And then we're going to look into how many sales are happening, any type of zoning, how the city is growing. We want to get an idea of, is this going to be a good market? Because with mortgage foreclosure properties, you may pay more. In fact, generally we will, and we're willing to pay more on a bank foreclosure as long as it doesn't have a bunch of second mortgages or liens or encumbrances, because usually it's going to be a higher quality property.
Yeah, I mean, you can generally pay more when condition is better. And with bank foreclosures, you're getting a better quality property in most cases than you get with a lot of tax sales. Just because of the process, many tax sales, it takes a lot longer for properties to end up in sales than it will with most of your bank foreclosures, you encounter. And so a lot of times, yeah, bank foreclosure properties can be in great shape. But the way that we need to determine that, though, is by doing all of that basic research. And the market analysis and the neighborhood review is actually kind of something we do at kind of the same time. We're trying to figure out the value of the property. We're also trying to figure out the health of the market there, so we can determine, if it's an area, if it's a location, if it's a neighborhood that we want to own property in or not. Because there can always be problems that can exist or that can arise if you don't check that kind of thing. And so it is an important thing to check for values here related to the property. Now, because we're dealing with properties that haven't been through foreclosure that makes them unmarketable, we still have marketable title, which means that we're going to have options for financing. There's going to be a number of different ways that we can get financing on these types of properties, and a number of different resources or places we can turn to.
Yeah. For the foreclosure auctions, when we're actually at the auctions, though, we're going to need to have cash for those. But like Shade said, there's going to be different money options when we're looking at REOs or some of these, FHA type properties. So if we're looking at the foreclosure, we can go ahead and we're going to need to use our own cash, or you can partner with another investor. But one advantage that we do have is once we've gotten that property, it's really easy to get a hard money lender to loan us on the property. So maybe you're able to come up with the cash, you bid on it and win the property, and you've got a hard money lender that's already kind of agreed that they'll go ahead and essentially, once you get that property in your name, they'll go ahead and loan on the property. So there's going to be more options. And then when we're talking about something like an REO, these you might even be able to get market rates on them, not higher interest rates. You may be able to get financing on them, even conventional loans. And so that's one of the advantages with REO properties, in addition to buying them at the auction. The auction is going to usually provide some of the, it's going to be the first chance that people get to bid on them. So if it's a real nice one, it may go ahead and sell in there. But with REO properties, these banks are looking to get rid of them. And that's the reason they're selling for about the same price, about 67% average, in value through the bank, because the bank wants to get rid of them.
Well, and that's largely too what's going to set the prices on a lot of these, is going to be based on what the bank tried to get for them there initially versus what they were offered on, and the best deals are picked up at auction. And so that's kind of why people will go to auction sometimes to pick these up, is because if they're going to get a little bit less than that, or if they're going to be able to get a little lower price, it's probably going to happen at the auction rather than somewhere like the REO, where the bank has basically just kind of set their bottom dollar on what they'll take there after they've done some negotiating and whatnot. So you might be able to get a little bit lower price here, I think, at the auction maybe than you might otherwise. But yeah, the benefit though is that it's like almost like any other real estate in a lot of ways when it comes to financing it. There's lots of strategies for bidding, and really this is probably more important than ever with the way that auctions are today, with how many auctions, with online auctions. You do need to have some planning that goes into your bidding and how much you're willing to bid. And in fact, this is something that we say pretty often, but if you're doing this right, you're going to lose a lot more properties, when it comes to bidding, than you're ever going to win. if you're winning every property you're bidding on, you're obviously paying too much because you're willing to outbid anybody that's coming up against you. That's kind of how you're doing it right, is if you're losing, if you're losing 75% of the properties that you bid on, that means you're probably bidding them down. You're probably trying to get them for a good price rather than overpaying.
Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna check out and make sure we understand what is the after repair value, what's it gonna cost. We want to estimate repairs. Depending on the condition, we may even estimate 10 to 25% of that. If it's in good condition, maybe it's only going to be 10%. And we have other options with these properties as well, where we don't have to rehab and we can sell them at a discount, still make kind of be the middleman of the property. You pick it up there at the auction and then you flip it to somebody who's going to rehab it, but get a good idea of what our profit's going to be. And that's what's going to help us determine what our high bid amount is going to be set at.
I like the middle option here where it says, psychological timing. It's, for online auctions, avoid early bidding that invites competition. Place strategic bids near the end, monitor bid extension rules. This is really such a good idea, because if you get too aggressive with the property early on, you can invite a lot of bidding early in an auction that can raise the price of that property up just far beyond what you would otherwise if you hadn't given the same property that kind of attention. And it's not that the property's not going to get attention, it's going to get attention one way or another towards the end, but you want to try to limit just how high up that bidding is going to go in any way you can. And if ignoring the property or trying not to bid on it to draw attention to it until the last 10 minutes of the auction, is what you do, it's probably going to be an effective way to at least ensure that the bidding doesn't get too crazy. Or at least it's not, I guess you can't ensure the bidding is not going to get too crazy, but it's a way to at least minimize how crazy the bidding can get, or at least give yourself a chance there on properties that, that don't get too aggressive. That's how you're going to get properties at the best prices anyway, is if you try not to draw too much attention to the bidding and then you try to snag them at the end.
Yeah, I mean, that's always what we recommend to our coaching students is if you can bid live, bid live. If not, then bid as close to you as you can to when that auction ends as possible. So if you can jump on during your lunch and the auction ends in an hour or two, that's going to be the best time to do it. There's some things that we need to consider. We're going to get title insurance as soon as possible. It's going to be worth it getting on it, especially as we're buying a property through the mortgage foreclosure. Another thing to talk about it, and this is really kind of a whole training in itself, is the difference between judicial sales and non-judicial sales. So there's going to be some states that are going to go through a full judicial foreclosure similar to a tax sale. Now, the difference is the mortgages and those kind of debts can still attach to it, but these are going to be a court process. But they also have something that's called a non-judicial state. So it's so important to look into the different states, but for determining if you want to invest within that particular state.
Yeah, well, so there are certain states that don't allow they won't allow non-judicial foreclosures within their state. There's a whole bunch of states that don't allow them, and in those cases lenders have to go through a regular lawsuit to get their money back. And so foreclosure timelines vary pretty dramatically. We can see 116 days in Texas versus 3,000. Is that right? That's crazy. 3,038 days in Louisiana, which we're talking about what, like 9 years there or something, 8 or 9.
Yeah,
That is
I mean,
so long.
that's an extreme version. I was looking for the most extreme version, but this is the reason why it's so important to look into those individual states. And some states are also going to have a redemption period. That's something you need to consider as well. So, when you're looking at a foreclosure, every state is not the same. States can be as different as possible. I mean, and so that's the reason why when we are investing within mortgage foreclosures, there's some states that we're just going to avoid. And then there's some states that we're going to be interested in based on the fact that it maybe has no redemption period or a very short redemption period, a couple of weeks or a couple of months at the very most. And then also what type of deed is going to be issued. Now, regardless if it goes through a judicial foreclosure or a non-judicial foreclosure, we don't really care because to us it's going to be the same, but that's going to determine how long it's going to take before that property actually goes to the auction. Because with the non-judicial foreclosure, essentially these are states where they've allowed the bank to do a clause on it that allows them to do a quick foreclosure without going through the courts.
Yeah, well, and that's why the bank would like to do that in those cases, is just to reduce the overall foreclosure time, and so they can foreclose there in 1 to 3 months, where judicial foreclosure states it's probably more like 4 to 6, or longer, in some cases. But yeah, lots of things we can deal with existing occupants. Something you do need to consider when you're looking at properties, though, in different states from where you live, or if you're looking at picking up one of these types of properties, is just to look at the eviction laws in the state and understand what they are. In most of the states around, I think you've got pretty decent eviction laws here, and getting somebody evicted out of a property doesn't take too long. I've only heard of nightmares in a few places in California
Oh,
and
in Seattle. I watched a
oh
video
yes,
this week about, in Seattle, there's somebody that's been living in this home for over 2 years, essentially just squatting. And the person has tried to evict him four times, already. He's going for his fifth eviction notice. And there's a whole thing involved with it where, he's getting some money from some charity, but the charity gets the money from the city. So, I mean, there's a lot of people, they've had protests outside the person's house, but it's kind of interesting. That's the reason it's important to look into that information as well. And then when we do our on-site inspection, we're going to look to see, is the property occupied? Can we see signs that the property is occupied, or does it look vacant? That's going to make a determination on how much we're going to bid on it as well.
yeah, yeah. In fact, beyond that, some of the things that come along with buying this way is it is more of an as-is purchase, so you don't have all of the benefits of inspections or having appraisals coming. It's basically a cash purchase there, as-is property, which for tax sale stuff, we're all too familiar with how that side of it works, and so that's going to feel familiar. But we do need to make sure that any of the other smaller liens or things that might be attached to property, like outstanding property taxes, that's another thing that's going to need to be paid. If it's, of course, property tax at this point, though, they could be outstanding. You just never know when you go look at a property. It's always worth checking the small print there, or to see if they're including, or if they have something like, taxes could be owed here on a property, because Texas never forgets about their taxes, and Georgia's probably pretty similar.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of states out there where they may have 6 months or a year. It hasn't been long enough to go to the tax sale, but they could definitely be having it. So as far as once we've went to the auction, we're going to go ahead and submit the payment. Most of them are going to require some type of payment, wire transfer, cashier's check, cash, usually within 24 to 48 hours. That's something we're going to need to know. So we can't just go ahead and buy it and then hope to be able to get the financing. We need to have our financing in place. Once that happened, the trustee or the sheriff with the county will go ahead and record that deed and sell it there, record it with the county commission, with the county clerk's office, and then go ahead and offer it off.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of the important things we do from that point is about getting the property secured, and then we can start to, we get the property inspected, we can start to execute our exit strategy on it. So, or if we're going to fix the property up, we can get that, process started here on it for renovations or any kind of work that we're going to do on it. But yeah, from the time that you pay, until the time you get the deed, uh, a lot of times is not very much time at all. But as soon as we have the deed in hand, though, we're generally trying to get the locks secured, trying to get the locks changed, get the property secured, so that we can get that process started here. It's when letters go out as well. Actually, I'm thinking here with the regular bank foreclosure, it's a little bit different here. These are properties that are mostly usable, and
Well,
ready to
there
go.
there could there could still be people there. You might still need to send out, eviction notice, or see if we can work with them to find out when they need to be out. So the property's still occupied in those ways. We're still going to need to contact the person that's living in the property, the former owner.
Yeah, it's true. I guess all that stuff happens post sale, so it is a pretty busy time with these properties here post sale, when there's a lot to do.
Yeah, and then once we've got the property vacant, then we're going to go ahead and make sure we get an inspector over there. We're going to find out what needs to be done. We're going to evaluate that and then start exiting our rehab strategy. If we're going to be repairing the property and rehabbing it to resell, or are we going to act more like the middleman and try to find a buyer quickly where we can make some profit and then flip it to somebody else that'll do the rehabs.
Yeah, a lot of options here, and the general quality is going to be pretty good on these properties. And so, like Steve's saying, some of them may need work, some of them may be fairly usable like they are. Let's review some recently sold examples here of properties like these. And check them out. And these are in some of the most competitive markets. So if we look at some of the more competitive markets, you'll get an idea that there's money to be made in almost every market, I think, if you really dig down and look at it. But these are in competitive markets that are known for having high prices.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We picked the most competitive markets, where we've seen real estate sell. So this is in the Miami area, and you can see that this property had opened up and had an opening bid of 443,000, and it ended up selling for 576,000.
Yeah, so it bid up some, and of course, the assessed value doesn't necessarily mean a lot in these places. In some sales, it's accurate, but not in this case. The market value on the property is closer to almost $1 million. It's $989,000, which it seems like a lot, but this little $1,500 house, has it, and because of that, the potential profit on this deal is like $400,000 plus. So it ended up being, really a pretty good purchase here that they picked up for half of value roughly. And, we'll just need to fix up, and it's not that big of a property to fix up. So, they may not have to sink that much money into it in order to bring the full value out of it.
Yeah, well, and looking at that assessed value, that's going to be the assessed value. The county is also going to have the market value. So in this case, I think the market value on it was 670 or something. And then the actual market value and looking at the comparables online are 989. So, even if they put $200,000 in repairs or paying any additional debts on it, they still could make $200,000 rehabbing this property, and that's if they put 200,000 into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of profit for any transaction with a house like this, and it's about as. In fact, they could probably come out of it much better than that too, just because they bought it so well here in the end.
Yeah, I mean, this could easily make 300 grand, and that would still leave you 120,000 to rehab it.
Yeah. Here's another one. So this one here, it opened up here for 343. It sold for 580,000. We took a look at the property here. Estimated value on it's about 900,000, and so this is property that has a potential profit of about 350,000.
Yeah, one thing that's kind of interesting is you can see that the plaintiff had a max bid of 356,000. So the bank was willing to kind of buy it at 356,000. They owed 343,000. So the bank was actually willing to pay more than they owed to try to own this property. That kind of tells me something about it, that there probably wasn't, and we'd have to look to be sure, but in looking at that, it would make me think that if the bank was bidding on it themselves, then there's a chance that it actually had some kind of, it probably didn't have any additional mortgages or a bunch of liens on it.
Yeah, it's true. They wouldn't be willing to pay up for it if it had, issues there with it, and so that does make sense here. Pretty good purchase again. Here's another one that opened up here. I'm not sure how much it opened up for here actually initially, but we know that the amount it sold for was 255.
Yeah, I think final judgment amount, or the opening bid was 483,000. And it shows the amount it sold for 255. So that, we'd have to look a little bit more into it. I don't know if the bank was willing to take more than that. You can see that the plaintiff's max bid is hidden. So this one was a little bit different. We'll probably have to look into the deed after it's recorded to find exactly what happened. But it almost seems like it sold for too cheap based on how good it was.
Yeah, it does make you wonder if it's one of those things where if you can't get at least that, the final judgment, or the judgment amount, if they don't reject it somehow, or if they still allow people to bid on the property, if it's kind of like an auction, if it doesn't hit the reserve, is that kind of the way that it works? I wonder in some cases. I mean, I know the properties that basically go REO after this, but it is interesting when it shows that they sell like this.
Yeah, in fact, I didn't even notice that it had the final judgment amount there being higher than the bid amount. when I made this. I was just pulling them up quickly and making slides, but that is kind of interesting, and that's something that could be researched, because if it was purchased and it actually sells for 255,000, and of course, we'd need to check what kind of debts are against it. But it is interesting that the bank didn't have an opening bid, a bid amount that was that high. Now
Yeah.
these ones are a little bit more competitive. Denver is a really competitive area, but I think with a lot of these properties, you still have the chance to make, oh, $80 to $100,000 pretty easily. That gives you plenty of rehab and additional cost. And this is what I think these investors are doing, is if they can make about 100 grand on these deals, I think it's worth it for them to pick them up and flip them quickly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these make sense as simple deals that way. I mean, the lender's starting bid amount on this one was like 335. It sold for 350, so 15,000 over. Basically the opening bid amount is really where this sold at, and uh, they paid up, but it's a $510,000 house, and so 350,000. It's not that. They basically got a pretty good deal here on with $160,000 or so of profit potential still. And if you look at the property, it's a pretty new construction, which a lot of these are oftentimes. This one was not built that long ago, and so not the kind of property you're going to need to have a lot of issues with or problems with, especially if you're picking out properties like this.
Yeah, well, and you can see that it was built in 2016. So it was fairly new. And I think that what some of these investors are doing is buying them to use them as rentals. So it had all of these new photos in there that you could see before it went to the auction. In fact, several of these properties did. And so I think the investors are buying them to either use them as rentals or to turn around and flip them. So if you could buy a property like this as a rental and it's worth 510 and it rents out for let's say $2,500 to $3,000 a month, well, that's going to be a good investment for you, and plus you have all of that built-in equity.
There's a good question here. Is cash king here with these bank foreclosures, or do you get some time here for payment? And at least with the auctions, cash is kind of king, at least I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to need cash there. Most hard money lenders aren't going to give you money for a property that you're not going to win. Now, there's some that are out there that are willing to negotiate or do something, but the reason they're going to give you the money, essentially, they're going to be, you're going to need that deed. And so you could get hard money lending to refinance the property or give you money on the property afterwards. But really, there at the auction, you're going to need cash of some sort, unless we're looking at something like an REO where that could be an option.
Yeah, yeah, I think this property is a good example of it, kind of like the previous one too, where they pay up a bit. This one only sold for 15,000 over what the lender's starting bid amount was, so it sold for 353 and is valued at about 510. Really similar numbers here to the one before. Also a newer property here, built in '86, but the nice neighborhood's been lived in ever since as well, so it's in great shape. Where condition wouldn't be a problem. And this is another one where, yeah, you could, all of these would work out really well for rentals. And I wouldn't be surprised if you did nothing. I mean, if you had $10 million and all you did was just buy houses, especially if you're buying them from bank foreclosures like this and then making them rentable and renting them out and just hanging on to them, you would do so well with your money. You could turn that 10 million into a lot within 10 years.
Yeah, well, and this one had interior photos as well. You can see that the roof has been updated, even the windows have been updated. It's been repainted. And so, one thing that was kind of interesting on several of these properties is they were kind of purchased during the pandemic, 2001, 2002, 2003. So, they've been owned for a couple of years, and then they've gone into foreclosure within the first 1 to 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, it's interesting too how you can see that past, how you can kind of see what's happened with properties in a lot of cases. The more you look at the records and the time frames when people bought properties, you can start to develop kind of a picture of exactly what's happened with the property and how it's ended up here, in either the tax sale or in the bank foreclosure here, about how long they had to pay it off. You can start to piece together, the history behind what's happened.
Yeah, this one ended up, they had 210,000 on it. That's kind of where it opened up. It ended up selling for 394,000. They paid quite a bit. One thing that was interesting as well is that there was some photos because they were trying to sell this property, maybe 6 months before the auction, and they ended up paying up for it, in my opinion, because it's still going to need some rehab. But I think the reason they did is this is a really nice area, and the homes here are pretty valuable within this particular area of town. And so that was kind of my guess on why they were willing to pay up for it, because you can see that it's definitely an older looking house than some of the other ones we were looking at.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit nicer property, and it's older, but somebody has put some money into it already, and because you can see some of the things about the property have been updated and are new. So I think that side of it looks pretty good. One of the questions there is you know, is spot payment essential in bank foreclosures, or do we get time to say like 24 hours to wire payment or submit a certified check? I think they allowed the same way that kind of the tax sales do, at least in terms of
Yeah,
settling up on it.
they'll usually give you more time, but that's again something that you're going to have to find out from the auction company, the auctioneer, because they may, I don't want to say that there's none that are going to say immediately, but usually they're going to give you between 24 to 48 hours. But don't, you're going to need to check that on that particular auction before deciding if you're actually going to bid on it or not.
Yeah, now, like all real estate investing, due diligence is really important with this. In fact, in some ways, the due diligence is just as important and even more important when it comes to some of the stuff like the title research, because we don't have that foreclosure to be able to rely on. We need to know about anything that is attached to the property still. And so, um, you know, other than that, we do have a lot more financing options here. Once you can get the property acquired, everything is a lot easier too. I mean, granted, if you're going to get property from the auction, there is the issue there of trying to pay for it. That's always kind of been an issue. But once you get the property in hand, everything is easier because you have marketable title with the property. And so everything beyond that will be like a regular real estate transaction, and you can use hard money lenders. It's much easier to borrow to get borrowers to lend here once you have the deed to the property as well.
Yeah, and I would assume, and I think that there is hard money lenders out there that would be willing to agree, kind of give you a pre-approval. Well, if you can get the house for this much, then I'll go ahead and wire over the funds. But you're going to have to get that all worked out and find a hard money lender that says, hey, I can pick up these properties. Let me show you some examples. Are you willing to fund the deal if I can win it at that price? And if they'll already agree to it, based on your research, then there could be some hard money and lenders out there that would be willing to do it.
Yeah. And yeah, title insurance, if it's an option, always get it, always get it with properties that are eligible for it. We've come to really appreciate title insurance when dealing with tax sales. So yeah, title insurance is great. And move fast post auction is really good advice, just because that is when so many important things happen here following, the transaction, getting access to the property, getting the deed recorded here, getting property inspected, and then getting that process started for either repairs or for turnaround.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So hopefully that gives you guys kind of an idea of the opportunity that's out there with bank sales.